and welcome to the unit that no Nigeria wants to hear about, which is savings. And savings, really, I'll be talking about the life cycle model of consumption, intertemporal utility maximization, consumption smoothing, models of savings behavior, and I'll be linking that all, like how our saving behavior as Nigerians really makes the CBN governor's job quite hard. So as you can see, China, the rate of saving is about 50%. In Gabon, it's about 36%. In Zambia, it's about 37%. Botswana, it's 38%. Nigeria, it's 17%. And low rates of savings actually make it quite hard to get money for investment, make it difficult for the banks to lend, puts a lot of pressure on the economy. So this is just one of the issues that the CBN governor and the CBN team at large must be dealing with right now from a policy perspective. So the life cycle model of consumption and saving is a model in economics that explains how consumption and savings typically change over time. Now, remember that this is just a model, it's a theory, it's something that some economists came up with to explain human behavior. So basically, it says that when you're like young, at home, bothering your parents, roaming around the house, stealing meats from the pot, you're a bit of a liability, right? You're not saving anything. You're consuming you're consuming far more than you produce. And then as you grow older into a more stable job, your first entry level job, you start being able to save small amounts. At about 40, according to the theory, you reach your peak level sort of earning, but you also reach your peak level saving. And then the earning kind of goes down and you're able to save less as you go into retirement. Now, when you go into retirement, you're no longer earning, but you're consuming. And this period is called saving as you dig into your savings, take out of your different assets to fund your lifestyle as you grew older and then die. Kind of sad, right? But it just explains sort of the typical rates or a theory of the typical way that your savings would change and consumption would change over your lifetime. Another theory called the permanent income model. And this sort of states that consumer spending um, really people will spend money at a level consistent with their long-term expected long-term average income. So basically, there's a psychological number somewhere in all of our brains that is what we expect to make over the period of our lives, and we spend money based on that number in the back of our heads. So you see some people, they even call me like they say the person has. There's a Nigerian politician called Peter Obi, and he has a reputation for not spending very much. And I'm a bit like that as well. So if we're following the permanent income model, people would say that he's not spending much because he doesn't think that he's going to earn much, right? That's not true, always. But I'm just giving that example to sort of bring this permanent income model to life. And it was suggested by an economist. It's very well respected that, people, the level of expected long-term income then becomes thought of as a permanent income that can be safely spent. So a worker will save only if his or her current income is higher than the anticipated level of permanent income in order to guard against declines in the future. Um, what non-economist that kind of disagrees with this is Kanye West. So, if you've listened to the lyrics of Diamonds Are Forever, one of Kanye West's sort of biggest hits, there's a line where he says that it's in a black person's soul to, I think he says spend that gold or something. You spend your whole life trying to get that ice, and by ice he means like big jewelry, expensive jewelry, those, rappers that wear like these big clunky necklaces and huge gold crucifixes or platinum crucifixes, that's what they call ice, right? And all the rings. So he's saying that actually that it's in the soul of a black person not to follow the permanent income model. And actually, we spend as we make it. We don't have such a long-term perspective. Um, Now, Kanye isn't an economist, but Mervyn King, the former central bank governor of the Bank of England, and Harvard educated economists, weirdly enough, actually agrees with Kanye West. So he also put forward the theory. He believes in the permanent income model, and he believes about 70% of people follow this permanent income model. But 25% of people in society just don't have a long-term perspective on anything, and they spend anyhow. This is a good point to the next slide, where we're seeing a guy, Hush Puppy. Now, Hush Puppy is a Nigerian Instagram celebrity, and he's really famous for like what we call flossing, right? He's always in Gucci. He's, always in the most expensive hotels. He's always showing pictures of him on private jets and, on first class flights, and he's really famous in Nigeria for his flashy lifestyle. So this leads us onto the theory. I'm using Hush Puppy to explain intertemporal utility maximization. Guys, are you living your best life? So it's a temporal utility maximization. It describes how consumption, income, and wealth change over two different time periods to maximize a person's pleasure. So it's basically about consumption choice, how people choose to consume. Some individuals make very forward-looking consumption decisions. We don't spend all of our current income within the current period. We tend to try and save or borrow for our future selves, because we know that any consumption today comes at the opportunity cost of consumption tomorrow. And that's generally how most people kind of model out their lives. But there are differences. So I don't know how much Hush Puppy is saving, or whether he's saving right now, or but as you can see from the Instagram lifestyle, right? As you can see from all the flossing that goes on social media, you can see that some people have a different intertemporal utility maximization from others. And how to calculate intertemporal utility maximization is just current income plus discounted future income is supposed to be equal to current consumption plus discounted future consumption. So it's always a comparison between what we're earning now and what we're going to earn in the future, compared to what we're consuming now and what we're going to be able to consume in the future. Consumption smoothing is another sort of key issue that we consider in economics when it comes to savings. And consumption smoothing is the concept used to express the desire of people to have a stable path of consumption. People sort of translate their consumption from periods of high income to periods of low income for more stability and predictability. And this is just a theory again. Some people tend to spend more, some people tend to spend less, but the theory of consumption smoothing states that really people kind of don't spend as much as they have. Like, they're not flossing to the max when they're making money. They try and put some money aside so that they can spend it later. And they do that to reduce uncertainty against the future. But I guess we can all think about a friend or a family member or somebody that we know that doesn't do consumption smoothing at all. As soon as our money comes in, people have to feel it, right? But this is the concept of consumption smoothing and the term consumption smoothing is used a lot in economic conversations. So it's a concept that we have to. Now, I'm going to move on now that you understand the few basic concepts around saving and the economic models around saving, to explaining how saving affects our financial system. So I mentioned at the beginning of the video that the CBN governor probably has like, you know, some issues because of Nigeria's low savings rate. And I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, why, why does our personal savings rate affect, affect, uh, sorry, why does our personal savings rate, why does savings rate of Nigerian citizens affect what the CBN governor is doing? So this is answered by the IS curve. And the IS curve describes the the goods market. It slopes down to to the right, and it represents the fact that as interest rates fall, so as the rate of interest falls, people and businesses try to invest in more long-lasting goods. So they invest in houses and cars and equipment. And when interest rates fall, people don't put so much money in savings accounts, right? They put less away for savings and spend more on consumer goods because at that point, I mean, what's really the point of saving? There's no incentive to save when the interest rate is really low because people don't feel like it's worth saving. They spend because what are they getting? What reward are they getting for the savings? So the effects of a falling interest rate is an increase in GDP through greater investment and less savings. Now, there's sort of a counterbalance to that and sort of a counter argument or a counter, there's always this yin and yang sometimes in economics. And while the IS curve pushes people and raises GDP and is the force that raises GDP because people are investing less saving less and investing in sort of consumer goods, and that raises GDP because, as you remember from, I think the first unit, GDP is equal to consumption plus government spending plus investment plus net exports. So whenever any of those things rise, if the others stay constant, then you get an increase in GDP. The LM curve describes the money markets. Now, the LM curve slopes up and to the right, and as the economy expands, banks and other financial institutions need funds to support the extra investment. And to get those funds, they're trying to encourage consumers to deposit more of their cash into the bank. And in order to lend it out and feel safe while lending it out, they need to make sure that it's going to be there for a long time. So as the economy expands, as GDP expands, corporates, businesses, they need money from the bank. And to get that money, they encourage people to deposit more money. Because remember, and I think people tend to forget this, that people's savings, especially the longer term savings, like fixed deposits in your bank, it's money from your savings that the bank lends out as loans to businesses. So when people don't save, the banks have less money to lend out. And I think people forget how closely savings and the ability for a bank to give loans are actually linked. So the IS and LM relationship kind of creates opposing forces. On one hand, a falling interest rate tends to cause the economy to expand, right? Because people are not saving and they're buying stuff because they don't really see the point, so consumption and investment goes up. But on the other hand, an expanding economy causes interest rates to rise. Because there's less money, right? There's more demand for money. People are going to the bank asking for money, and the bank doesn't have enough money. So there's so much demand that it pushes interest rates up. So those are the two sort of yin yang opposing forces. And when the two curves meet, the forces are balanced and the economy is in equilibrium. So that's really the most important thing to think about when you're thinking about economic policy and you're thinking about the role of banks and the role of what individuals do in terms of their savings. So the individual saving decisions of Nigerians, the Nigerian culture around savings, and how it actually affects our economy. Um, that's probably the most important concept. So we've talked about intertemporal utility maximization. We've spoken about the life cycle model and the permanent income model of saving. We've looked at the actual Nigerian rate of saving compared to other African countries, and most importantly, we've looked at the IS curve. So now I'll just quickly talk through some other concepts to be aware of. In the last video, we spoke about, or in the last unit, sorry, we spoke about substitution bias, and there's something in this module that is quite similar to that, which is the indifference curves. And the indifference curves show the combinations of two commodities between which a customer is indifferent. Meanwhile, the substitution bias, maybe they're not indifferent, maybe one is just more expensive, but here the individual is, completely indifferent. Whether it's a Prado or whether it's a Lexus, they don't really care. Um, when you're thinking about the role of savings in an economy, I think, that Japan's economy is super interesting as well, especially when you contrast it with Nigeria's economy. So, Japan's economy has a very old population, they have a lot of debt, the economic growth is not slow, um, and there's something very interesting around savings that I'd like to talk about. So the Japanese economy and the Japanese people typically have a high rate of savings, very high rate of savings. They keep money in the bank, and how this has affected the economy is that there's more money available to business than the businesses can actually absorb. So this is like the opposite problem to Nigeria. And no matter how much they cut the interest rate, they can't seem to stimulate the growth in GDP that they're looking for. No matter how much they sort of try and disincentivize people from savings, it's still very, very difficult for them to induce economic growth. And they also have high levels of debt as well. But luckily, most of their debt, in fact, like the large proportion of their debt, is in their own currency and to local institutions. So they're not under so much pressure about the debt, even though they do need to grow their way out of that. Um, and the inflation is non-existent, right? Because and that makes it more difficult to pay back the debt. Because when there's inflation, the debt automatically becomes cheaper. But right now, it's kind of stayed at the same price. I've whittled on about the Japanese economy a bit, but the main concept I wanted to show is sort of the ISLM curve in theory and practice in a in a real economy where the rate of savings is high and it gets to a point that no matter how much you cut the interest rates, it's not inducing the economy or stimulating the economy because people have a very high savings culture and the money is actually just too much to go into that economy. So actually, what a lot of Japanese corporates have to start doing is start investing abroad to try and stimulate, and hopefully the profits will be repatriated home to try and stimulate the economy. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the effect of the stock market on people's behavior. So in Nigeria, actually, a very, 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 very small percentage of the population invest in the Nigerian stock exchange. So the stock exchange doesn't have such a huge effect on what we do every day, but in other countries it does. And I just wanted to take you through it. So, first of all, stock market has uh, an effect on investment in very developed countries, and some maybe to some degree in Nigeria, where um, falling share prices can hamper companies' ability to raise finance on the stock market, and that affects their probability. Sorry, that affects their profitability. There's something called the wealth effect, which is when people with shares who own shares see a fall in the wealth, it affects their financial outlook. So if they're losing money on their shares, they become less significant to spend money, which can drop consumer spending, which can drop GDP. So yeah, but I also point out that only 10% of households, even in developed countries, actually own shares. But still, it's something to think about. Also, it affects pensions. So anybody with a private pension or an investment trust will be affected by the stock market. So pension funds in developed markets, not in Nigeria. So in Nigeria, actually, pension funds don't invest so much of their money in the stock market. But in developed nations, yeah, PFAs, the pension funds, invest a significant proportion of their funds in the stock market. So if there's a real big sort of serious prolonged fall in share prices, it reduces the value of the pension funds. And the last thing is confidence. So often share prices in the developed economies are a reflection of what's happening in the economy at large. So the stock market itself, the media, every day you switch on the TV, seeing the stock market is falling, things are going wrong, the share price drops. This company came up, they did their conference call, and this is what they said. It was horrible quarter. That affects consumer confidence and can discourage people from spending as well, which can worsen a recession if the recession is already there, or cause a recession if there's no recession currently. So those are some of the effects on the stock market on the economy.